Hey, Steve Stanek here, the Dusty Charactometer. Today we're talking fill up your wine cellar, make wine. Here previously you see I have in the right a red wine in the primary fermenter, and on the left I have a Pinot Grigio in the clearing stages. One of my wines actually won an award a few years ago. Today's video I'm making this Malbec. It's a kit. Everything you need is inside. You have directions on the top left, labels on the top right, yeast on the bottom left, preservatives on the bottom right, and in the center at the top you have the clearing agents. It's very important that you go over everything with, sanitize it perfectly with, I use Star San, and first I go over it with powder brewer's wash. That way it doesn't leave any residual scents or anything on your winemaking equipment. So here I have myself preparing the Star San, and you add it to water a certain amount and it foams up big time. And this is where most beginners make a mistake, because if you don't adequately sanitize your equipment, you're going to have trouble. And remember in the high school, the high school experiment where we all had to expose a petri dish of agar for a certain period of time and saw what grew out. There's a lot of wild yeasts and bacteria and mold and stuff, and you've really got to make sure that all your equipment is meticulously clean. Now, a lot of people say that they sterilize their equipment, and that's not true. This is sanitization. We're just knocking down the potential contaminants to where it's not going to be a problem. Sterilization is autoclaves and face masks and that kind of thing. Anything that touches the wine has to be sanitized, so cleaning the top very thoroughly. Sorry to bore you. I stayed with this shot a little longer than I probably should have, but I just wanted to drive home the importance of sanitization. And I use my own just tap water. And the first thing that goes in is the bentonite, which is sort of a clay solution that helps with the clearing stages of the wine down the road. And you have to kind of stir to get it to go into solution. And if your tap water tastes good, it's perfectly adequate to use in your wine. If I'm making a very expensive kit, I might use spring water that I buy in the store. So here, this basically is a large concentrated bag of grape juice. You pry the yellow cap off, and you got to be careful that you don't get dust and contaminants into the primary fermenter. It's a little bit of a struggle. This is a small kit. It only weighs 15 pounds. But some of the kits have 6 gallons of water, and for there I use a transfer pump sometimes, because this is rather awkward. I do wear a hairnet when I'm making my wines. The last thing I want to do is give a wine bottle to a friend and have a hair in it. That would be highly embarrassing. I don't care what I look like. I'm by myself. My stepson would say, "You look like an idiot." Well, it doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's about the wine. So you want to get all that good grape juice out of there. So I use some warm water and rinse it out several times so you get everything in the primary fermenter. Then you top it up to 23 liters. This primary fermenter is actually a Cooper's beer primary fermenter. It works very well, and I just go ahead and use it. I did have one bad batch one time, and I popped open the primary fermenter and it smelled terrible, and there's something floating on the top that I never recognized, so I had to pitch that. But that was it was only once. Who knows, maybe a fruit fly got in or something like that. Now here you see me fiddling around with the temperature a little bit. You don't want your water to be too hot that you put the yeast into, otherwise it'll kill the yeast. Oh good, blurry yeast. So you pour it in there and let it sit for about 15 minutes or so. I used a big spoon because it was already sanitized, so you could use a small spoon. You don't have to use a huge one. And as I said, I keep that lid on there to keep pathogens out. And you dump it in, dump the yeast in. I give it a little stir. You don't necessarily have to do that, but pretty simple process. It's kind of like baking a cake. All the directions come, and surprisingly, some wine contests you can submit kit wines. That's what happened for me. It was Winemakers Magazine that had a contest. Put the lid on. Then there's no airlock on this kit, this primary fermenter. The CO2 just gets out from the space between the top and the fermenter. Here I'm using the Star San to sanitize the hygrometer. I like this hydrometer. It's all plastic. I just dump it right into test it right in the wine. A lot of these are glass. If it ever broke, you'd have to throw the whole batch out. But this one, it's not gonna break. So give it a little spin, and you notice right away how high the specific gravity is. So there's a lot of carbohydrates in this kit that are going to be fermented into alcohol and CO2. So it's 1.080. Still spinning. And this is the primary fermentation stage. Now in a few days you'll see, or maybe hours even, you'll see foam developing and condensation inside. That's a sign the yeast is working. This is actually a time-lapse photography. I just took the lid off and shot a half hour. Now here you see the temperature in the room is 76 degrees on the bottom left. Humidity is 47 degrees. But if you look at the scale on the right, the thermometer on the right, the temperature is actually 78. So this is an exothermic reaction. The yeast is actually creating a little bit of heat. Another clue that the fermentation is going. So 5 days later, we've dropped all the way to 0.992. So it's time to rack the wine for the first time. This day I got smart. I wore a purple shirt. And this little tap makes it really, really easy. Here I'm just using gravity to drop it into a clean sanitized plastic carboy. This is by far the easiest day of the winemaking process. You want to leave the sediment behind because that contains dead yeast and such, and you want to get that out of your wine. So now make sure you close the tap, get rid of the funnel. You're going to put the airlock on first in the Star San soaking. I have the cap that snaps on. Then the airlock itself, you fill up halfway with water, and then there's a bell that goes on top of that, and then finally a lid that goes on top of that. And that way the CO2 can come out, but air can and contaminants can't get into the wine while it's fermenting. There's that sediment I was telling you about. You want to leave that behind. You don't want that in your wine. Now this is in real time. You see the bubbles coming out every few seconds. You get another bubble while the fermentation is going. After about 10 days, we retest the specific gravity, and now the airlock, you can tell there's no activity. The bell is dropped, and the specific gravity is dropped to 0.985, so it's completely fermented out. Now here I'm running a little Star San through the transfer pump. This pump is actually part of a filter. The big metal plates are places where you can clamp in filters, but if you're patient and rack carefully, you really don't need to filter the wine. The filtering doesn't clear a cloudy wine. All it does is kind of polish it a little bit. Now I'm running a little water through to rinse out that Star San before we run the wine into the clean carboy. So now it's time to go. And I used to siphon the wine. You can do that, but once you've had this pump, you'll never go back. It's so much easier. So I'm going to shut it off right as the wine starts coming through. I'll get rid of that carboy and put the wine into the new carboy. And it actually only takes a few minutes. I sped this up so it wouldn't be like watching paint dry too much. So when you get down to the bottom, I'm watching two things here. I'm actually being careful to see how much wine is left in the carboy on the right, and also that I'm not creating a wine foam volcano on the left. And here the wine god smiled upon us, and I ran out of wine before I got that wine foam volcano. Later on, I wasn't quite as lucky, but then I just shut it off. And I was proud of myself here. Next we've got to put in the preservatives and the clearing agents. You'll notice I have my porter cable 1/2-inch corded drill in the foreground, and that's because we're going to degas the wine, a very important step. Now this is a degassing tool. I'm chucking it up into the drill, and I'm going to degas it for about 5 minutes to get all the CO2 out of the wine. And again, I'm not going to show you all 5 minutes of this, but this gives you an idea how it works. Later on, I'll show you a picture of the tool, see what it looks like. And this is that tool, so you can slip it right through the opening of the carboy, spin it around, get all the gas out. Now, if you don't do that, if you look at this, this is a previous batch of wine I made, and if you look right at the rim, you get bubbles. And if you submitted a wine like that to a contest, I can hear the judges now, "What are you doing? You got bubbles in your wine. This is not a sparkling wine. What's the problem, you idiot?" So you don't want to do that. Now to top off the carboy, we don't have much CO2 being made, so we want to get as much air out of there as possible. This is actually a Pinot Noir, and that's the one that had the bubbles in it. Checking the cork for scent. Nose is okay. So I'm going to pour it right in here. You want to bring it right up to the top. They say 2 inches from the neck. So you want to decrease the amount of oxygen in your carboy. And then putting the airlock on. Now this time I'm going to do something a little bit differently. Since we don't have the yeast is not active, basically we've stabilized the yeast. I'm going to use this private reserve, which is a inert gas. I'm just going to put a little blast through the airlock before I put the bell on. So here I'm putting the airlock on. I'm going to go back behind me and get the private reserve can. I'm going to put the straw through the little opening at the top. I'll have the bell at the ready so I can just drop it right on. And that inert gas is going to protect the wine from oxidation. And this you've seen before. You can see me putting the lid on the airlock. Now this I'm going to save for later. I had half a glass of Pinot Noir. So I'll suck the air out and drink it that night. And I only had a few drops of wine. George Cornelius says, "I can't make wine without making a mess." He's the purveyor of fine vine wines or the winemaker's toy store in Dallas. So you manage the mess. 10 days later, it's time to rack again. This is bottling day. This is the most work this particular day. So I've already sanitized the transfer pump, ran a little water through it. Got a clean sanitized carboy. We're going to put the wine in. So I'll put that in there. Got to really think of where things are going, where the intake and the output is. I'm putting the intake in the wine. Now I want to catch that little bit of water. I don't want to dilute my wine with water, so I'm going to catch that little bit of rinse water before I put the output hose into the new carboy. So there it is. Shut it off, transfer it over. Yeah, I used to make beer. I started making beer in 1977. Here's that foam volcano I was telling you about. This is just to show you how easily the labels come off of the labels that come with the kit. They know that people want to reuse their bottles. So the store-bought wines, you might have to soak them in water, or maybe even add a little OxyClean or something. Now here I'm using Star San to sanitize the bottles, and you get the idea. You just go bottle to bottle, transfer it down, give them a little shake. They do have a what do they call it? Sulfiter. It's a little gizmo. You can turn the bottle upside down and it spritzes sanitizing agent up in there. I've done this so long, I just do it this way. I'm content with that, so that's what I do. I do sometimes, I rinse the, you see all the foam. I used a little rinse water to get the foam out of there. Otherwise the foam is going to interfere with the bottling process. Bottle tree is really handy. It allows them to drain. You can stack them up upside down. All right, now this is my Enomatic bottler. I used to siphon the wine into the bottles. What a mess. They do have bottling wands, but this is the way to go. There's no going back once you've used one of these. And some small scale wineries use this same unit. My friends let me down sometimes. I let my friends down sometimes, but my Enomatic never lets me down. You put a new bottle in and it fills it right up. It's basically a suction unit, almost like a medical suction unit, but it really makes bottling day a lot more pleasant. I've had red wine all over the place when I used siphoning. Okay, time for corks. You think I have enough corks? This was 1,000 corks. Only need about 29. And so I count them out. I drop them into a little star sand just to make sure there's nothing bad on them. And this is a Italian-made floor corker. It's made by a company called Ferrari. And you basically put the cork, it's got a bronze brass, I don't know. It's got jaws in it that smush the cork small, and then there's a plunger that pushes it right in. And make short work of, there it is, Ferrari. Now, I read a review, or heard a review on video review saying this is the Cadillac of wine corkers. I wonder why he didn't say it's the Ferrari of wine corkers, seeing how it's a different Ferrari. It's not the same company. But I like the sound of that Ferrari corker. Takes a little bit of effort, but does a nice job. You want to have them flush with the top. And here's a close-up of the jaws at work here. Actually, I put a little oil on it before I filmed this particular little clip, so it's a little quieter that day. So now it's starting to look like something. We've got 29.5 bottles of wine. Now I've decided to put these red PVC caps on top to bring out the leaf, the red leaf on the label. These are great. PVC is thermoplastic, so when you heat it up, it becomes plastic. But these caps have also been expanded, so when you heat them up on the bottle, they get smaller. Now this item on the left is called a horizontal thermocapsulator. Sounds like a weapon of mass destruction. But I used to use boiling water for this. You had to, this thing's great. You just plug it in, turn it on, let it heat up. And these coils get really, really hot. It's got this nice V groove. And you basically slide them in there, and the PVC capsules get heated up and shrink down to their natural size. So when you do it in boiling water, you've got to hold them on with something. I used to use a soup spoon so that they wouldn't fall into the water. But this thing is awesome. This is made by Ferrari as well. This is my most recent acquisition. I got it from the winemaker's toy store. So now it looks like this. Now we just got to put the labels on. And here the encapsulator is cooled. I've unplugged it. I'm just going to use that V groove as a nice way of holding the bottle while I put the label on to try to get it straight. These are great. They're just peel and stick. I'm peeling slowly because these are kind of an awkward shape and they tear easily. But I basically put the wine there, turn it to a good place. And I do hit the bottles with a little bit of Windex first. I want the bottles to be nice and clean and shiny when I give them to friends and stuff. And this always reminds me, when I was a kid, Zenith, the radio and TV company, they had an advertisement where they said, the quality goes in before the name goes on. And that's what I think about when I'm putting the labels on my wine, which is kind of neat. So here we are, 29.5 bottles, but the proof is in the tasting. So that half bottle, I just use my vacuum And that evening I gave it a try. I'm looking for legs here, just a little hint of legs. This was a $42 kit, not very expensive. Now it's nice and dark. It's very, very clear. This is, you can't even see your fingers through it. And the nose, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'll just tell you what I smelled. It was very, very strong of cherries, and the flavor was very strong of cherries, fruit forward, not much of a finish, moderate tannins. Is it an award-winning wine? No. It's a nice quaffable wine, and I think it's comparable to, say, a Yellowtail or a Fetzer or maybe even a Woodbridge, something like that. In a grocery store, it probably costs $8 to $10 a bottle. On a cruise ship, it'd be like $28 a bottle. So very drinkable. Many years ago, I read a book titled "How to Live Well on Practically Nothing," and this is one thing that I do. For just a few $100s, you can have a wine cellar that would rival, several $1,000 wine cellar. The economies of scale for winemaking are much better, and that's why I stopped making beer. The ingredients for me to make beer end up being almost the same as what it would cost me to just go to a grocery store. So I now exclusively make wine because it's just more lucrative, or in a sense more lucrative. I went to a tasting in Pensacola for winemakers, and there was a young couple there. They had made their first batch, and the lady said, they had 30 bottles of wine, and she said, we're going to have wine for a long time. And she said in a week and a half it was all gone because they'd given it to family and friends and neighbors and stuff like that. So you got to kind of be careful. There was a show on about Costco, and it was kind of refreshing. They shadowed the wine buyer for Costco, and she went to these various wineries and whatnot. And she was making some notes during a tasting. And Carl Cantonilla asked her, what are you writing down? And she looked at him like he was crazy and said, that it tastes good. And that's so refreshing because I used to live in Vacaville near Napa. My wife and I would go wine tasting every once in a while. We did the wine train and whatnot. And you listen to these wine snobs talk, and it's kind of crazy. But the bottom line is, what do you like? The process shouldn't be that intimidating, One time I did have a case of, I put the yeast in a batch, and it just didn't start. The bubbling never started. The primary fermentation never started. I cut a corner. Unfortunately, I didn't measure the specific gravity, but it was obvious that there'd been no yeast activity. So I added some yeast nutrients, and I added some new yeast to the mix, and it did start. So I let it primary ferment, and then after a while the yeast activity stopped. So again, I didn't check the specific gravity. So I went ahead and I finished the process. I bottled it and whatnot. Then when I tasted the wine, it was extremely sweet. So first, that was a case of fermentation failure, and who knows, it could be a lot of things. And then the second case would be a stuck fermentation, because the fermentation did start, but then it stopped for some reason. There must have been, I did some research online and stuff, and it said sometimes there may be something on the grape skins that inhibits the yeast, but I couldn't drink it. I didn't really like it, but it wasn't completely lost. And this was an expensive kit. This was like a $150 kit. It was a Pinot Noir. But fortunately, a former coworker of mine and her husband liked it, so I literally gave her cases of the stuff. So it was a win-win situation. But that's one of the problems you could potentially run into. But I've only had that happen once, so who knows? I just wanted to make some comments. Let's have some fun here. I wanted to make some comments on two movies, Sideways and Bottle Shock. The interesting thing about Sideways, very popular movie, most people have seen it. Miles was so against Merlot. In fact, he even threatened at one point to leave if anybody so much as ordered Merlot. And this led to what was called the sideways effect. Sales of Merlot declined, and sales of Pinot actually went up, resulting in $400 million, according to one study, in lost revenue. Some wineries went so far as to rip out their Merlot vines and put in Pinot, which is hysterical because there's nothing wrong with Merlot. It's a perfectly good varietal. And what's funny is in this one scene, he says he likes all varietals when he's riding with Jack in there in the car. And then during this scene, when offered a Cab Franc to taste, he says he's come never to expect much from Cab Franc, and this one's no different. And he kind of pours it out in a disgusting manner. And but what's interesting is the star of his collection, the 61 Cheval Blanc, is actually mostly, it's like 75%, I think, Cabernet Franc. So one of the wine snobs online said that the author made a mistake, but it turns out he really didn't, because I ended up picking up this little booklet on the movie, and Alexander Payne comments at the very back of this little booklet. He says, "A conundrum. Why does Miles criticize Cabernet Franc when in fact the special wine he's been saving for years, a 61 Cheval Blanc, is made almost entirely of Cabernet Franc? What do you treasure in your own life that you secretly despise?" This is from Alexander Payne, the author. The other movie I wanted to comment on, Bottle Shock, was based on a true story. In 1976, a British fellow by the name of Steve Spurrier organized a wine tasting in Paris. It's all covered in this book by George Tabor, who was the only member of the press who was present at this tasting. But they put up Napa wines against French wines. The judges were all French, and the testing, as I said, was blind. Well, the Napa wines won in both the white and the red category. The movie Bottle Shock is about Chateau Montelena, which is the Chardonnay that won in the white category, and Stag's Leap Cellar's Cabernet Sauvignon won in the red category. And the French were like sacre bleu, only they felt they could make great wines. So Steve Spurrier became persona non grata in French wine circles. But hey, the judges were all French. Madame Kahn, the one female on the panel, demanded to have her score sheets back, and Steve Spurrier and George Tabor refused to do that because she didn't want to prove to anyone that she had voted for a California wine. But this really helped sales of Napa wine take off. The takeaway from Bottle Shock is that we all have scars from past experiences, relationships, and whatnot. But really, the scars make us who we are, and we're perhaps better for them.